there's a place in the Indian Ocean 1,000 kilometers from anywhere. A tiny tropical atoll that looks like a desert island. It isn't.
Diego Garcia, it's the most remote military base in the world.
A massive runway for stealth bombers cuts through the palm trees. Those are radar domes watching the sky. That lagoon holds up to 20 warships. American bombers and gunships took off from here to attack Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and now Iran. American troops here enjoy cheerleading performances. But this island isn't American. It's technically British, but the population is entirely made up of American soldiers and imported migrant workers. It's called the Footprint of Freedom. For decades, the official story was that nobody ever lived here. That was a lie. Here's where we are, roughly the midpoint between East Africa and Indonesia. The Chagos archipelago, about 60 islands in all, 56 square kilometers of land in total, smaller than San Marino. The islands sit very close to the equator. There's no extreme weather, coconuts grow year round, and the waters teem with fish. Until the late 1700s, nobody lived here. Then the French arrived, planted coconuts, and shipped in enslaved people from Madagascar and Mozambique to work coconut plantations. In 1814, Britain took over these islands along with the French colony of Mauritius. The Chagos would be administered from the Mauritius colony 2,000 kilometers away. After slavery was abolished, the plantation owners brought indentured labourers from India. From these groups, French, African, Malagasy, Indian, a new people formed, the Chagosians. Roman Catholics with their own distinct identity, music, and language, Chagos Creole, based on French. Now, this was a plantation society. Life was tough. Nearly everyone worked the coconut plantations, producing copra.
Copra provides a vegetable oil, which is widely used in making soap and medicines.
Everyone had work, nobody paid rent, housing passed from parent to child. School, healthcare, pensions, funerals, they were all free. Families had plots of land to raise animals and grow vegetables. They were poor, they worked hard, but life was stable and predictable.
Mon name Diego, mon grandi Diego, mon marié Diego. La vie m'a tout tiré comme un poisson dans l'eau. Tu gagnes travail, tu gagnes la case. Au pratiquement dia depuis grand matin, moi me lever, me la mettre dans la poste jusqu'à soir.
Du monde fait ses gars, tout le monde danser ensemble. Mais c'est maintenant joli la vie.
2,000 people lived on these islands in 1961. The same year, a boat arrived carrying an American. Following World War II, the United States built the largest network of military bases in human history. Today, there are more than 750 US military bases in over 70 countries, where they station missile cruisers, nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, spy ships, bomber squadrons, long-range missiles, and nuclear weapons that can reach any target, that can make demands in any corner of the world. Island bases, easy to control and defend, and with small local populations that cannot protest, were considered the best base locations. In 1961, the American survey team sent to Diego Garcia, the largest and most populated island in the Chagos, reported that it was perfect. But the Chagos were part of Britain's Mauritius colony, and Mauritius wanted independence. The Americans preferred a base on British rather than Mauritian soil. The Americans told the British to detach the Chagos from colonial Mauritius to create a new colony, one that would guarantee base rights to the United States. The United Kingdom, winding down its own empire and taking a subordinate role in the rising American one, was happy to cooperate. But there was just one problem: the locals. The United States wanted the islands under its exclusive control without local inhabitants. On an American document titled Copra Workers on Diego Garcia, a Navy official wrote, "Absolutely must go." The islands were to be fully sanitized. While the American base would only be on Diego Garcia, the British guaranteed no indigenous population shall remain on any of the islands. In August of 1945, as World War II's victorious allies drew up the charter for the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals, they named a new crime: crimes against humanity. It was the British who drafted the exact wording of what would be considered crimes against humanity, and they included deportation of a civilian population. The United Nations accepted this definition at its very first session. Under the new UN Charter, a colonial territory's population had rights to self-determination. It was the colonizers' obligation to prepare colonies for independence as soon as possible. But even though they helped construct this new international law system, for Britain, laws were for other people's empires. The British immediately saw the problem with their plans to deport the Chagosians. To recognise that there are permanent inhabitants will imply that there is a population whose democratic rights have to be safeguarded. So they had to pretend that there were no permanent inhabitants in the archipelago. In the British Foreign Office files, there is a memo by Anthony Oust titled "Maintaining the Fiction" that advised the British government to argue the Chagosians were only a floating population, because this would bolster our arguments that the territory had no indigenous or settled population. Oust wrote, "We are able to make up the rules as we go along to provide legal power to deport people who will not leave voluntarily, to maintain the fiction that the inhabitants of Chagos are not a permanent or semi-permanent population." In February of 1964, a secret Anglo-American conference in London finalised the base deal. But first, Britain had to get the islands from colonial Mauritius before it became an independent country. In 1965, during the independence negotiations, Britain told Mauritius to give up Chagos for £3 million or there would be no independence. Mauritius took the deal and became independent in 1968. 5 years earlier, the UN General Assembly had passed Declaration 1514 on decolonisation, which stated colonies should not be broken up into new colonies. Britain ignored it, and on the 8th of November 1965 created a brand new colony, the British Indian Ocean Territory. They did not pass the law in Parliament, but by order in council, a medieval British practice in which a secret council stands before the Queen, reads out proposed laws, and with no debate and no vote, the Queen declares them to be laws. The new colony had exactly one purpose: to prepare Diego Garcia for the Americans. In a secret memo, a British Colonial Office official stated, "One of the things we would like to do in the new territory is to convert all existing residents into short-term, temporary residents to give them temporary immigration permits, describing them as inhabitants of Mauritius or the Seychelles." The British now demanded that all residents on the islands must have a legal permit, and then they refused to give the Chagosians any. Because they were born on British colonial territory, the Chagosians were automatically citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. But the British adopted a policy of concealment to hide the fact that Chagosians were British citizens. A 1971 memo noted that it was not at present Her Majesty's government's policy to advise contract workers of their dual citizenship. Using this logic, the Chagosians were merely foreign contract labourers, so Britain wasn't deporting a population, it was simply letting some employment contracts lapse. If the Chagosians were what they actually were, British citizens born on the islands, Britain would be expelling its own people. Another secret Foreign Office letter stated, "We would not wish it to become general knowledge that some of the inhabitants have lived on Diego Garcia for at least 2 generations and could, therefore, be regarded as belongers." Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart wrote in a secret document that by any stretch of the English language, there was an indigenous population. The most blunt secret correspondence within the Foreign Office was a 1966 memo which said the object of the exercise is to get some rocks which will remain ours. There will be no indigenous population except seagulls. Underneath, a colleague added, along with the birds go some few Tarzans or Men Fridays, whose origins are obscure. On the 30th of December 1966, Britain handed Diego Garcia over to the United States for 50 years, without charge. In reality, the Americans paid for it secretly as a $14 million discount on the Polaris nuclear weapons system. Construction of the American base was slated to begin in March of 1971. The governor of the Seychelles, Bruce Greatbatch, wrote down what he thought was the fastest way to get rid of these people: to drop the islanders on a pier at Mauritius and sail away quickly. In 1968, Rita Boncoux brought a sick daughter to Port Louis in Mauritius for treatment.
Mon bonhomme tu peux assiser dans sofa. Une guette moi dans mon figure comme ça, mon tout lit sur des bras tombés comme ça, il y a une congestion en place. Sur la main paralysée, sur la bouche, tout ça là. Lève-lui, amène-lui à l'hôpital. Il me voit ça même à sa congestion là même.
Separated from their home, possessions, jobs, and everyone they knew without warning. Those on the islands were left to wonder why people weren't returning. The British closed the plantations, they cut off supplies, food and medicine ran out. One islander recalled, "They tried to starve us." Rumours were spread that the islands would soon be bombed. The Chagosians were prepared to live on the outer islands, 300 kilometers away from Diego Garcia, but the Americans would have regarded that as unacceptable. The United States construction crews landed on Diego Garcia in March of 1971. Bulldozers ripped the trees from the earth. They shattered the coral reefs with explosives. Diesel fuel defiled the once pristine waters. Then, before the final deportations, something happened that I can't stop thinking about. The Chagosians loved their dogs. The order came from Bruce Greatbatch: destroy all the dogs, but save the horses. Unable to shoot enough dogs, the American and British agents lured them into a warehouse and gassed them to death. While the overseer tasked with this destruction said it was not their intention to threaten the islanders, he wasn't surprised that they assumed that they were next.
From
1971 on, the islanders were put on boats and deported, first from Diego Garcia to the outer islands and then out of the Chagos entirely. We were assembled in front of the manager's house and informed that we could no longer stay on the island because the Americans were coming for good. We didn't want to go. We were born here. So were our fathers and forefathers who were buried in that land. On the 27th of April 1973, on Perros Banús, a 20-year-old Elise B. Elise was forced onto a rusty ship with around 400 others. She was pregnant with her first child. This was the final deportation from the Chagos. Greatbatch insisted that the horses travel in the best conditions. The people were loaded into the hold, forced to sleep on piles of guano, a valuable fertilizer, also known as bird shit.
Et quand nous finissons embarquer dans la calbato là, avec mauvaises conditions. Nous avons un ban d'animaux, un ban d'esclaves dans ce bateau là. Ban de monde qui type.
The boat was very overcrowded. The conditions were filthy. They had taken 4 days to travel and many of the women and children were sick. The boat deck was covered in manure, urine and vomit, and so was the hold. The first stop was the Seychelles to drop off Greatbatch's horses. While there, the Chagosians were housed in a prison. Then they continued the multi-day journey to Mauritius. And that's when the nightmare started. On arrival, no one from the British or Mauritian government was there to receive them. They had nowhere to go, they had no money, they had no accommodation. A once self-sufficient people who lived an isolated, predictable life in a very tight-knit community were abandoned on the docks of a foreign country, in a cash economy they didn't understand. Some cried at the docks, waiting, hoping that a ship would come and take them home. Others jumped into the sea.
Bateau là fin prend 4 jours pour y arriver Maurice. Mais quand il est arrivé, moi mes enfants fin naît et les fin morts. Moi dis à qui faire mes enfants fin morts parce qu'ils m'ont traumatisé de ce bateau là. Moi j'ai beaucoup de tracas, moi bouleversé. À cause de ça même qui quand mes enfants fin naît, ils morts. Moi me dis nous besoin pas perdre l'espoir. Nous besoin imaginer qu'un jour nous pourrons retourner dans la terre que nous nés.
The Chagosians have a word in Creole for what happened next. It's called sagren, dying of sadness. Within a few years, entire families died in poverty. Many others took their own lives. Girls were forced into prostitution. Rita Banku lost 4 of her children. One mother said, "I was so sick I was in hospital and both my children were too." They died in the January, within 8 days of each other. The British Foreign Office response to all of this was, "Some deaths are bound to have occurred in the normal course of events." A 1972 US memo noted the relocation of the former Copra workers on Diego Garcia has worked out fairly well, with little adverse publicity. With few job opportunities, no savings, and a lack of familiarity with interest and the Mauritian economy, the Chagosians were easy prey for loan sharks, who they borrowed from to pay for basic necessities. Years after their deportation, the Chagosians were still considered outsiders by most of Mauritius. They earned about $2 a day, and half of them couldn't read or write, and drugs and alcohol tore through the Chagosian slums. All those involved knew how their actions impacted the Chagosians. As early as 1975, the Washington Post was reporting the islanders are now living in abject poverty. Washington has rejected all responsibility for their plight, and London has placed the onus on Mauritius. Some of the men would like to return to Diego Garcia to work on the American base and look after the church and cemetery where their relatives are buried. The Americans refused to hire Chagosians. The British were paid. The Americans got a base, the plantation owners were compensated by Britain. Mauritius was paid for the islands, but the Chagosians were left with nothing. During the planning, execution, and aftermath of the deportations, 3 British Prime Ministers, Labour and Conservative, and their cabinet ministers had personal knowledge of these expulsions. Not one of them objected. None of them even mentioned the islanders in their memoirs. Dennis Healy, the defense secretary who gave Diego Garcia over to the Americans, when asked decades later said, "I have no memories of the Chagos archipelago. Sorry." The Chagosians had been erased from history. When the plan to lease Diego Garcia was first mentioned in Parliament, the British Foreign Secretary stated, "All that is involved is a modest naval communications facility. It will in no way constitute a base, as there are no plans to station operational forces there, nor will the facility provide logistical support." Today, Camp Justice, or the Footprint of Freedom, the names for Diego Garcia, houses 2 massive runways capable of landing B-52 nuclear bombers, a deep water port for warships, aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines, satellite tracking facilities, and one of the very few places on Earth that can reload a submarine's Tomahawk missiles, the same missiles that earlier this year killed 150 girls in a school in Iran. Around 4,000 people are stationed here. Half are military personnel, half are civilian contractors. Entry is restricted and journalists are banned. Not exactly a modest naval communications facility. Its first war was Vietnam. It was vital in Saddam Hussein's US-backed invasion of Iran. In 1991, it was a critical, high-volume launch pad for the Gulf War. B-1, B-2 and B-52 bombers flying from Diego Garcia dropped thousands of bombs on Afghanistan and Iraq. The base was also vital for attacks on Somalia, Yemen and now Iran. Diego Garcia was also a CIA black site, a vital node in the United States' torture and rendition program that stretched across the planet. KBR, a Halliburton subsidiary that built the Guantanamo Bay prison, also built a prison on Diego Garcia. The British government denied that Diego Garcia was a black site. The Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, told Parliament in 2004 that there were no detainees in Diego Garcia. In 2005, he dismissed the accusations as conspiracy theories. In 2008, the new Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, admitted that the government lied. The United States had used Diego Garcia for rendition and torture flights. Colin Powell's former Secretary of Staff described it as a site for nefarious activities. The United States Torture Inquiry found that it was used with full UK cooperation. For its new inhabitants, life on Diego Garcia is good. There's a golf course, tennis courts, pools, a Brit club with themed party nights, and cheerleaders are shipped over to entertain the troops. The work is done by imported labourers, mostly from the Philippines, on around $2 a day, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. The Chagosians, however, refused to disappear. Instead, they organised. Chagosian women founded the Chagos Refugees Group. Rita Banku's surviving son, Olivier, now leads it. Chagosian women led a movement for their rights. During a protest in Mauritius, Charlicia Alexi was arrested and beaten. A photograph of her being dragged into the back of a police van embarrassed London. When Chagosians went on hunger strike, the British finally agreed to talks. Not with the Chagosians, but with the Mauritian government. In 1982, the United Kingdom offered a full and final settlement of a few £1,000s per Chagosian, barely enough to pay back the debts they had incurred since being abandoned in Mauritius. To receive the compensation, islanders had to sign away their right of return. The forms were written only in English, a language most Chagosians didn't speak. Those who couldn't write signed with a thumbprint.
L'autre dia nous signer pas mettre là-bas pour gagner ça. Après l'état nous ceux qui continuent signer ceux qui pas continuer mettre pouce et là d'autres nèg mettre en bas mais ça même au prononce mon droit c'est comme pour moi et ni moi ni mes enfants ici.
Si l'étudiant moi mon pèse signer mon droit, mon renonce mon île mon parti pour prendre 8000 là. Moi la vie en mer Paris moi mon paiement. Ça même pas prononce mon droit.
Chagosians stranded in the Seychelles got nothing. 5 days after they placed their thumbs on the paper, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British colony. The British government spent over £1 billion to send troops to defend the Falklands. Britain claimed that the right to self-determination of the 2,800 Falklanders was paramount and that they had to be protected under the UN Charter. One can only wonder why the UK treated the Falklanders and the Chagosians so differently. By the 1990s, the Chagosians had learned of their UK citizenship, and they used that to bring legal cases against the British government. In October of 2000, Olivier Banku flew to London to testify. On the 3rd of November 2000, the British High Court made a ruling. They overturned the law that was used to expel the Chagosians. They could now finally go home. Tony Blair's Labour government refused to accept the laws of their own country. They claimed that the islands were uninhabitable, despite the fact that wealthy yachties spend months of the year camping on the outer islands, and thousands of soldiers live on the western part of Diego Garcia. Before the Chagosians could raise enough funds to resettle the islands, in 2003 the United States and Britain invaded Iraq over weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. Many of the planes bombing Iraq launched from Diego Garcia. The base was now considered vital. In 2004, the Blair government used the same tool as the government in the 1960s, the Queen's Order in Council. This overturned the High Court ruling and once again banned the return of Chagosians to every island in the Chagos. This was over 20 years ago, when many of the Chagosians that experienced the expulsion were still alive. The British government decided that they should die in exile. In 2010, the Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, declared the entire Chagos to be a marine protected area to protect the rights of the fish. WikiLeaks published a US cable from 2009 that revealed the truth. In it, British officials explained to the Americans that a marine reserve would, be the most effective long-term way to prevent any of the Chagos Islands former inhabitants or their descendants from resettling in the British Indian Ocean territory. They reassured the Americans that no Man Fridays would return to the islands. Colin Roberts from the Foreign Office told the Americans, "We do not regret the removal of the population." Rita Banku died in Mauritius in 2016, aged 91, waiting to go home. The Chagosians did everything the rulebook asked of them. They used the legal system, they went to court, they won, and the British government ignored it. So the Chagos refugee group teamed up with Mauritius, a state with a seat at the UN and leverage. Mauritius also wants these islands, not for the Chagosians, but for the exclusive economic zone that surrounds them, which is the waters around a landmass that countries get exclusive control over. By expanding their exclusive economic zone, Mauritius would get more territory for fishing, tourism, and a bigger footprint on the map. Mauritius took London to the international courts, arguing that the 1965 severing of Chagos from Mauritius was illegal. In 2019, after a court case with extensive testimony from Chagosians, the International Court of Justice ruled 13-1 that Britain had unlawfully separated Chagos from Mauritius, and that Britain must end its administration as rapidly as possible. They also noted that the Chagosians were forcibly removed and prevented from returning. The one dissenting judge on the panel was the American judge.
Que de mener, est-ce qu'il ou quoi pas faire les qui a fait mal, quand on dit mon déraciner le sosil, comme un animaux, pas peut connaître que permet nous, et mon bien ça grandit jusqu'à aujourd'hui, mon pas connaît même comment mon sorti dans mon sagos. Il fait nous sortir par force, et mon bien sagrin, et mon l'âme collé tous les jours, mon mazine, qui mon bizarre retourne dans mon île. Mon dit mon bizarre retourne dans mon île que de mener, et mon bizarre almo là-bas, et que nos grands-parents fin enterrés dans l'endroit que nous prenons naissance et dans nos îles natales.
The United Nations General Assembly backed the ruling with 116 votes to 6, and they gave Britain 6 months to cooperate with Mauritius in facilitating the resettlement of Chagosians. Backed by the United States, the British refused to comply. This was until 2022, when Liz Truss's short-lived Conservative government quietly opened negotiations with Mauritius. In October of 2024, the new Labour government finalised the negotiations. Foreign Secretary David Lammy explained the status quo was clearly not sustainable, and a binding judgment against the UK seemed inevitable. The UK did not care about the outer islands. Its only concern was Diego Garcia and the American military base. The deal was that the United Kingdom would give the Chagos back to Mauritius, but Diego Garcia would be leased back to the UK for 99 years at £101 million a year. Britain would then continue to allow the Americans to use the base. The Chagosians were not involved in the negotiations. It had no guaranteed return, and Diego Garcia would be off limits for another century. Every Chagosian born on Diego Garcia would die without ever seeing it again. Mauritius would also be incentivized to please the Americans at any cost, including not resettling Chagosians, in order to maintain that $101 million rent. Donald Trump called the deal a great act of stupidity and a very woke thing in January of 2026. Then in early February, he said that it was the best deal available. Then in mid-February, he demanded do not give away Diego Garcia. The treaty stalled. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it won't go ahead without American approval. Then in late February, the United States and Israel attacked Iran, and the UK gave the United States permission to use Diego Garcia as a launchpad for its bombers. While US military bases in the Gulf states could easily be targeted by Iran in retaliation to US-Israeli attacks, Diego Garcia is out of missile range. With no end in sight for American wars, it looks like Diego Garcia will continue to be expanded. A polluted, concrete, floating aircraft carrier may well be all that remains of the Chagosians' homeland if Americans do not resist their empire of bases. The Mauritius deal has now been shelved. The Chagosians have once again been thrown into limbo. The United Kingdom regularly speaks the language of democracy, sovereignty, self-determination, and international law, but only when it's in its interests. Diego Garcia has been used exclusively to project wars into other people's countries. People were erased from these islands so that they could be used as a launchpad to erase other people around the world. There are over 300 people who were born on the islands still living. They and their children want to go home. Whether they ever do is not decided in London, it's decided in Washington, in the president's office, by one man, although America very nearly had 3 presidents. For most of the summer of 1787, the men writing the Constitution of the United States couldn't agree on any of it. 3 presidents instead of 1, no Supreme Court, a Congress that could sack the president whenever it liked. The America That Almost Was is a series about those forgotten arguments, the presidencies that never happened, the constitutions that were nearly written, and the compromises that produced the office that signs off on the wars flown out of Diego Garcia. The first episode on the presidency is out now on Nebula, a streaming service owned by the creators on it, people like me. Nebula's team helped Spectacles produce an exclusive series with high quality animation, music, and a cinematic feel. There are tons of exclusive videos on Nebula because instead of clickbait, Nebula is built on subscriber satisfaction, creating things you want to see in order to keep you subscribed. Nebula Originals are the most ambitious works on the platform. They are longer, higher quality, and unique. These include series like Neo's Underexposure or the globe-spanning game show Jetlag. Over 200 creators are on Nebula, me included, posting their content ad-free and often weeks earlier, alongside exclusives you can't watch anywhere else. So go to go.nebula.tv/cogito or scan the QR code on screen and you'll get 50% off. That's just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. Signing up supports this channel directly. It makes the next video like this one possible, and you can watch The America That Almost Was right away.